Well, Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Hope everyone's having a good week. In that case, I'll ask you to turn with me, if you will, to the book of VaYikra, which is Leviticus chapter 6, verse 8. Because this is where our portion picks up. You're reading Parsha Tzav, it almost seems like it's just a continuation of last week's commandments, or Parsha VaYikra, okay? Because both of them focus on the various offerings and sacrifices that were available to the children of Israel to bring. Now, last week's Parsha established the different types of offerings that we learned was called korbanot, and the root word of that teaches us these are ways that we could draw closer to our Father. In some cases, it was just to draw closer. In other ways, it was to draw closer or to return to Him if a person had sinned by mistake. Now, just to review, these offerings included the olah, or the burnt offering, also known as the ascending offering. That was in Leviticus chapter 1. Leviticus chapter 2 was the grain offering, the minkah. Chapter 3 was the peace offering, the shalamim. Chapter 4 was the sin offerings, the katat. And then they had the guilt offerings that were in chapter 5 and part of chapter 6 called the asham. And this week we're going to look at these parshas and discover the difference that fell in between the two of them. Now, Parsha VaYikra listed two basic kinds of offerings. The voluntary offerings, which was also known as the nadavah, are the offerings that were required to atone for unintentional sins, the chovah. And, of course, as we read last week, depending on who it was and what the sin was, what you had to bring, and back and forth. So it laid it out pretty clear last week. Now, Parsha Tzav continues these instructions concerning the korbanot, but this time it's from the viewpoint of the Levitical priesthood. This was their responsibility. And where the priest had to know when a person brought an offering to the tabernacle or to the temple, what it was for, and what responsibilities they had, how it was to be offered, how it would be placed on the altar, whether they got to eat some of it, pass it on, or back and forth. There's a lot of details that the priest had to know. Now, the difference is you can see also represented in the opening verses of both of these parsha. For instance, in Leviticus chapter 1, verse 2, it said, "Speak to the children of Israel and say to them." But in this week's parsha, it says, "Command Aharon and his son." So it lays it out. The first parsha was to the children of Israel, for them to know. The second was for the priesthood. The question is, why is it important for the children of Israel to know what the priests were supposed to be doing? Wasn't this covered in some type of oral law that wasn't told? Why does he lay it out here for us to know what the priests were supposed to do? Accountability, to learn to have trust, but also to know what was going on, to understand everything that went in behind the sacrifices and what they were for and what they accomplished. This was very open to tell us everything we needed to know. Sadly, the opportunities, maybe we should say the privilege to bring these voluntary offerings was lost when Yehovah removed his presence from Israel. Well, we still continue to bring them, but they were truly lost when the temple was destroyed. First by the Babylonians, and we got rebuilt, and later by the Romans. Now, thankfully, on our part especially, prior to the destruction of the temple in 70 CE and the resulting exile that is still going on for many, Yehovah provided a means to atone for our transgressions. The transgressions of what? Okay, we're going to treat this like we do our early morning classes and our afternoon classes. We're here to study and learn, okay? So, transgressions of what? I mean, it's a simple question. Transgressions of his laws. His commandments. And for those of you who are afraid to call them laws, get over it, okay? These are laws. He says you do this, and you break his commandment, there's a punishment for it, okay? The good news is if you keep them, there are blessings, too. There are rewards, okay? So I love these laws. I love the ordinance, the statutes, all of it. I mean, it's his word. It's what gives us life, you know? But all of this came about through his son's voluntary offering of himself. His son was a korban. And is there any doubt that through his son and our acceptance of his son and what he did, we draw closer to our Father? Explain to me any other way that we can. There is no other way. It is only through his son that we can draw closer to our Father. Now, what he did not provide was a means of atoning for our sins by changing what constitutes a sin. Okay? He didn't say, okay, y'all can't keep my commandments or I'll do away with them. No, he said, my word is eternal. These commandments are eternal. Given that his word is eternal, his commandments are eternal, then sin, or what constitutes a sin, is also eternal. It's not going to change. We might as well grow up and get used to the idea that he didn't do away with anything. He didn't he doesn't hold us less accountable than he held his son accountable, or Abraham, or Noah, or anybody else. We're all held to the same level of accountability, and the sooner we realize that, the sooner we can get about this business of doing the work our Messiah called us to do by learning to be perfect. That's not a word that a lot of people have ever associated with me. Yeah, keep coughing. But when you understand that the word perfect means blameless, and you understand that I have submitted myself and loved my Messiah, it's not hard at all to be perfect before my Father, to be blameless before him. Because when I do mess up, he's there to pick me up, cleanse me, put me right back on the footing I was on, and to keep right walking. See, blameless doesn't mean I'll never make a mistake, never make an error. It just means that I recognize what I need to do when I do mess up. I won't even say if I do, okay? So for those of you who tell you it's impossible, you can't be perfect before your Father, I'm sorry. They just don't understand what the Messiah's sacrifice can accomplish for us when we submit to him, okay? It's not what we do, it's what he did for us and what he teaches us and how to walk. It's all great and everything about it. Now, in last week's Midrash, I explored some of the ways a person might continue to bring some of the voluntary offerings to Yehovah, even though the temple's not standing. And the reasoning that I based it all on was what the Messiah taught when he said, whatever you do unto the least of these, my brothers, you've done it unto me. And the flip side was what? Then you're not doing it unto me. Okay? So to me, even though the temple doesn't stand, there are ways that we can exercise bringing voluntary offerings before our Father that help us draw closer to him. You know? Not adding to the Torah by any means. It's just the heart of a son wanting to please his father. The heart of a son saying, okay, I lost that way, well, because of what my forefathers did, but Father, I'm not willing to settle for what I've lost. I'm not willing to settle not being able to bring voluntary offerings to you. So even though I can't bring the ones required, I'm going to go out and seek ways to bring voluntary offerings to you. And through the Messiah, he has revealed a way for us to do it. It's not adding to, it's just loving the Father and wanting to do more. It's actually boils down to, how dare we say this, to be like our Father in heaven. I mean, the audacity of somebody to stand up to say, I want to be like my Father in heaven. Not really, when he commands us to be as set apart as he is set apart. When his Son, our Messiah, said, now you go and be perfect as your Father in heaven is perfect, doesn't mean we're seeking to become Elohim, just to be like him, to be his sons and daughters. So that, while it may seem like a lofty goal, it's not one that's unattainable if our hearts are truly where they should be. And if we truly have his word written in our hearts, then we can really learn to be like him. Now, our forefathers lost this privilege, but why did they lose it? Basically, it boiled down to sin led on by apathy. What's the good definition of apathy? Sir?
No concern.
Half-hearted. I know he says it. I mean, imagine what it would have been like to have been in Israel, the temple standing there, the Father's presence there, and we say, now I know he said this, but we're under his grace, so you know what? We're going to mix in some of the pagan rituals into our service to him. We're going to weep for Tammuz. We're going to stand before the temple and worship the sunrise. Wait a minute. People are doing it today. What happened when they tried to do that before? The Father said, I'm out of here. And yet we think if people are doing it today, the Father's not going to say the same thing. Do you think he loves us more than he loves them? So the apathy and the sin is still with us. Now, I'm going to suggest that if we stop trying to find every way we can to draw closer to Yehovah our Elohim through his Son's offering and his Son's teachings of us, and we try to justify such language, but we're going to try to work our way through them this morning and see what it says. And here we go. Leviticus 7:21. And when a being touches that which is unclean, and we're going to discuss unclean this afternoon, okay? When a being touches that which is unclean, of the uncleanness of man, or the uncleanness of beast, or any unclean abomination, and shall eat the flesh of the slaughtering of the peace offerings that belongs to Yehovah, that being shall be cut off from his people. What does it mean to be cut off from your people? You were put outside until you repented, made atonement, and came back, restitution, and came back in. And that was whether you knew about it or not. Somebody came up to you a week later and said, hey, did you know you wasn't supposed to eat of that? Guess what? You can't say, oh, well, okay, I didn't know, it doesn't matter. No, you're still held accountable according to what Yehovah said. And if anybody finds a higher authority, please let me know. We'll need to talk because you found something that does not exist, okay? Now, for those who are satisfied with just keeping the letter of the law, it's real easy to say, oh, well, we don't bring peace offerings anymore, so we don't have to worry about this at all. But look at what it says. He said that anyone to eat of the flesh of the slaughtering of the peace offerings that belongs to Yehovah, that being shall be cut off from his people. Now, in the letter of the law, they may be right. I won't argue that point. But for somebody that's got the heart to say, well, Father, okay, Malachi chapter 3, verse 8. Would a man rob Elohim? Yet you're robbing me, but you said, in what have I robbed you? He said, in the tithe and the offering. You have cursed me with a curse. You have cursed Elohim with a curse, for you are robbing me, this nation, all of it. Bring all the tithes into the storehouse, and let there be food in my house. And please prove me on this, said Yehovah of hosts, whether I do not open for you the windows of heaven and shall pour out on you boundless blessings. So for me, wanting to draw closer to my Father and wanting to look at anything that he says belongs to him and make sure I don't take anything away from him, make sure I don't rob him, for me, one way to make sure I can draw closer to him is through my tithes and offerings. Bring all the tithe to him and my offerings to him. That doesn't stop me from giving to support a young child in Africa. It doesn't stop me from doing this or that, or support, what's a good organization? What about the Wounded Warrior Project? There's a lot of great things out there, but the tithes and offerings belong to him. I'm free to do whatever I want to do with the other 90%. Or 85, 80, whatever, okay? So I don't rob him. That's another way I can look at something that belongs to Yehovah and make sure I'm not eating it or taking away from him. Would that not make it easier for me to draw closer to him? I mean, when he says, hey, prove me on this and see if I don't open the windows of heaven and pour out boundless blessings on you. So is there a way to protect the peace offerings to draw closer? Certainly there is. Okay, let's look at Leviticus chapter 7, unless somebody's got a question or a thought. Okay, let's look at chapter 7, verse 23. And it says, speak to the children of Israel. How many of you here consider yourself or know you are part of the children of Israel? Okay? So he's speaking to us, right? Do not eat any fat of bull, sheep, or goat. Let me see, how much wiggle room do we have there? Now, unfortunately, there has been some wiggle room, okay? Because based on some other passages, some argue that this only applies to animals that are offered as a burnt offering in the temple, not to a bull I go out here in the pasture and slaughter to eat with my family. But then again, isn't any animal that we slaughter provide food for us and our family? Isn't it really a type of an offering before Yehovah? What are we supposed to do? Bless him for the provisions? So, could it be that refraining from eating any of its fat in remembrance of this commandment, another way a person might draw closer to Yehovah? Okay, the argument is by a lot that it's only for animals that are sacrificed. Okay, even if that's true. If I stop and say, you know what, because of what he says in this passage right here, I'm not going to eat any fat from the bull or the sheep or the goat. Will that help me
draw closer to my Father? To my thinking, every way I can find to honor that commandment is helping me draw a little closer. Just a little closer. And I want to be closer. Now, does that mean if I mess up and sit down and eat a ribeye and it's got a little fat in it that I've just committed to an unpardonable sin? No. But if my heart is to honor him every way I can, I draw closer to him. Okay? Because that's what it's really all about, isn't it? Not so much the physical act, but the heart that you're doing it with. I mean, I can sit down and write a tithe check. I can sit down and write an offering check and say, whew, look at me. Have I accomplished what it was designed to do? But if I give it with my heart, and I'm giving it because I love my Father and I want to draw closer to him, then I get the blessing for it. Let's go on and look at chapter 7, verse 24 and 25. And the fat of a dead body, and the fat of that which is torn, is used for any purpose, but you do not eat any of it at all. So you can take it out of an animal and do what? Would make it to use it to do what? Soap, candles, whatever. You just don't eat it. For whoever eats the fat of the beast which men bring as an offering made by fire to Yehovah, even the being who eats it shall be cut off from his people. Same rationale. We don't bring these animals to the temple anymore because there's no temple, right? But if he still refused to eat the fat and to honor our Father's word, to me that helps me draw closer because it keeps these commandments alive in my heart and in my mind. And so it's just shaping my heart and my thinking process to think like my Father and draw closer to him. Now in 26 and 27, we don't have any leeway at all there. Because there he says, and do not eat any blood in any of your dwellings of bird or beast. Any being who eats any blood, even that being shall cut off from his people. And to me, the more one endeavors to remove blood from meat, the closer he's drawing to his Father, you know. But there again, it goes back to the heart of fulfilling his commandments. It goes back to doing more than just what is basic, more than just the bare minimum that's required of his people to say, Father, I want to do this in every way I can to draw closer to you, if that's the purpose for doing it. If you're doing it to be more righteous in front of people, well, you know where that's going to lead. Any thoughts you'd like to share so far on this? Because after all, this is what it's all about, is it not? Learning to draw closer to him, to be more like him. Now, Leviticus chapter 6, verse 9. You've got to back up for this one a little bit. Leviticus chapter 6, verse 9 helped me better understand one of the commandments that we have in Torah. And that's the commandment not to kindle a fire on the Sabbath. Now, in 6:9, we were reading, this is the ascending offering, because it is burned on the slaughter place all night until morning, and the fire on the slaughter place, the altar, is kept burning on it. The fire on the altar, and by the way, how was that fire kindled? Who started the fire on the altar? Yehovah. His presence came down when it filled the tabernacle. It went out and consumed the sacrifices that were on the altar and kindled the wood. It is taught that since that fire was not allowed to be put out, they kept that fire burning 480-something years. They would remove the coals. They would keep that fire burning. Now, for those of you who grew up in the part of the country where you had fireplaces, or if you did fall cooking outside, what was the odds of putting wood on the fire and just leaving it there all night long and it still be burning the next morning? Now, you could bank coals up in a fire, and hopefully they'd still have coals that you could kindle a fire with the next morning. But if you wanted to keep it burning all the time, somebody had to be there to put wood on the fire, right? The word translating as burning in this passage is tukad. And that's what it means. It means to burn, to keep burning. Okay. By contrast, in Exodus 35:3, where we're told not to kindle a fire in any of our dwellings on the Sabbath, the word translating as kindle is teva'aru. And it means to set something on fire. We find this root word used in Shemot 22:6, where it says, when a fire breaks out and spreads in thorn bushes, so that stacked grain or standing grain or field consumed, he who kindled or started the fire shall certainly repay. So in the Hebrew text, we learned that there's one thing to keep a fire burning throughout the night or throughout any period of time, and quite something else to start or kindle the fire on the Sabbath. It's two different words, two different things. And of course, the lessons go on in this chapter, go on in this parsha, but they also go into the Haftorah portion. Yehovah told the prophet Yirmiyahu in chapter 7, verses 23 and 24 of Yirmiyahu, for I did not speak to your fathers or command them in the day that I brought them out of the land of Mitzrayim about matters of ascending offerings or slaughterings. But this word I did command them, saying, obey my voice, and I shall be your Elohim, and you be my people. And walk in all of my ways that I have commanded you, so that it be well with you. So when he said he didn't speak to our forefathers or command them about the slaughter offerings or the ascending offerings, why? What's he teaching us there? When he first led our forefathers and that mixed multitude of unruly Gentiles, when he first led them out of the land and he brought them through the Sea of Reeds, he didn't say anything to them about sacrifices and slaughter offerings. Why? All he said was, if you'll obey me, guard everything I teach you. What does it mean? What would have happened? How many sacrifices would have been required had our forefathers guarded every word diligently that our father spoke? There would have been no need for sacrifices and offerings. So once we came out and we realized that we were not going to listen to him the way he demanded, he spoke to us about these slaughter offerings and ascending offerings. Because he said, but they did not obey or incline their ear. So all of this became necessary. He told the prophet Hosea, for I delight in loving commitment and not slaughtering. The Father delights in our obedience to him, our loving him so much that we soak up every word he says. And if he says do something, we don't look at that as a challenge. We look at that as an opportunity. And if he says not to do something, we don't look at that like a spoiled little brat by how come they won't let me do that. We look at that as he loves me enough to protect me by telling me the things not to do. For I delight in love and commitment and not slaughtering, and in the knowledge of Elohim more than ascending offerings. Wow, what an opportunity to get to know our Father and to live like him. Our forefathers did not obey or incline their ears to hear or guard the word of Yehovah. They chose instead, again quoting from 7:24 and 26, to walk in counsels in the stubbornness of their evil heart and went backward, not forward. They stiffened their necks and did more evil than their fathers did. When it said that they chose to walk in counsels, where do you think those counsels came from? Well, in the first place, where did those counsels they followed that got him in trouble, where did they not come from? They didn't come from our Father. So somewhere, somebody started coming up with different counsels than what the Father actually said, right? And when they started listening to the counsels of others that was not what our Father said or wrote in His Torah, it started leading them into disobedience. The disobedience grew to apathy. Apathy led to the Father removing His presence from the midst of His people, and eventually even the temple that He resided in, so that there was really no trace of Him there anymore. But it was because they had stubbornness in their hearts and they went backward, not forward. They stiffened their necks, did more evil than their fathers. Every generation gets a little more apathetic, drives a little further away from the Father until it's almost second nature to follow after the counsels of men. Now, the author of Hebrews wrote about entering into Yehovah's rest. He wrote, "Since it remains for some to enter into it, and those who formerly received the good news did not enter in because of disobedience, he again defines a certain day, today, saying, though David was so much later, as it had been said, today, if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts." What day do you think he was talking about? People who had formerly received the good news did not enter into his day, that time, because of disobedience to what? Our Father's Word. But could I take that a step further? And again, this is not to add to the Father's Word. But could it be that we didn't listen to our Father's heart? Why does the Father say not to steal? Because He doesn't steal. Why does He say not to bear false witness against a neighbor? Because He doesn't bear false witness. Why does He say keep the Sabbath day? Because He Himself started keeping the Sabbath day and told us how. So, to me, and let me qualify that. To me, when I see His law, I see His heart. And when I choose to break His commandments, I'm not listening to my Father's heart, who loves me and wants only the best for me. We have a Father who loves us and wants to bless us beyond anything we could imagine. In fact, he said, I'm going to make it real difficult for you to get my blessings. I'm going to set before you today laws. Then these laws contain life and blessings, death and curses. Choose you which one you want. This was not like, let's make a deal where there were 3 doors. There are only 2 doors.
And you know what's behind them.
Yeah. His way, the world's way. Which we say the world's way, okay? Oh, the ways will come out of the world. What are we really saying?
Anything that's not of the Father.
There's His way and there's the evil way. There's not a kind of good, kind of evil way in the middle, is there? So are we listening to our Father's heart when we read these old heavy, burdensome commandments that He says are not too heavy and not too burdensome, but they're in our heart and our mind to do them? So here's where it is today, that we need to stop, because If you look at the world around us today, it's not hard to see that we're living in a very apathetic time. The Torah, where does it stand in most people's lives today? Yeah. So that tells me we're living in a time when we as his people need to be taking a stronger, louder stand and warning the world what happens when you become apathetic to his word. Not based on what we think or what we want it to say, but exactly on what the word says that was written and handed down to us at Mount Sinai. The word that our Messiah came and lived out and gave his life rather than break it. Okay? We live in a very apathetic time, a very dangerous time, because apathy is dangerous. It led Paul to write to Timothy, in the end days, perilous times are coming. So we have to ask ourselves where we stand today. We can be legalistic. And I'm going to define legalistic to you. Looking at exactly what the Word says and saying, I don't have to do one thing more than this right here. Okay? Okay, I'm not going to eat the meat of the peace offering, so I am covered. But I'm not going to look at that part that says that anything else that belongs to him either. So where do we stand today? Are we being legalistic that we're only doing exactly what the letter of the law says? Then why are the first two commandments, the two greatest commandments according to our Messiah, is to love our Father in heaven with all our heart, soul, and strength? It doesn't say love our Father in heaven exactly, as legalistically, only to the point of exactly what those commandments tell you have to do. And why love your neighbor as yourself? If he's not saying, why aren't you every day looking for ways to show God you love him even more? Why are you not looking to show your Father that you love your neighbor even more? You're willing to go beyond just the bare necessity to do whatever you can, whatever you can think of. And if the temple's gone, don't let that stop you from looking at ways to draw closer to him, to do more for him. We study and seek to keep even the least commandments and teaching others, but do we stop there? Did the Messiah have to travel all the way across the Sea of Galilee in the middle of the night to reach a demon-possessed man in the Gadarenes? But he did. Did the Messiah have to feed the 5,000 men and all their families that day? Did he have to, according to Scripture? Did he have to do that? I would suggest, too, that when you get very, very deep in Torah, the answer would be yes. He didn't have a choice because he loved his Father. And he loved his neighbors himself. And he saw this as a way to go and do even more. But if we read the commandments of Torah that we're unable to fulfill according to the letter because the temple is not standing, or do we search for ways to fulfill the spirit of the Torah as well? Again, that's not adding to or taking away from the written Torah, but actively seeking to serve him with all our heart, soul, and strength. All while continue to guard and do what is written. The Torah is not a restrictive book of laws. It's a book of laws that serve as a springboard for us to do even more, to be even more set apart as our Father in heaven is set apart, and to walk blamelessly before him. There again, it all goes back to our heart. How do we look at Torah? Do we look at it as a basic thing of laws we have to do, or do we look at it as our Father revealing his heart to us and saying, now, if you want blessings and you want life, guard my heart, my words diligently with your own. If not, if you choose not to, then you're choosing death and curses. So if you're looking for ways to do more, you must first learn and understand the basics. You can't come into our Father's kingdom and say, you know, I'm not going to worry about learning your commandments. I'm just going, as the Spirit leads me, I'm going to go out here and do what you tell me to do. No, one of the first things he tells us is to learn to diligently obey and guard his voice. But once you learn these basic commandments and you learn how to apply them to your life, how far can you go in loving the Father with all your heart, soul, and strength, and your neighbors yourself? How far can you take it if you do it based on his commandments? Is there anything you can do for a brother because you're loving him and trying to show him the love of the Messiah that the Father would get angry about? Will the Father get angry if you decide, you know what, I'm going to tithe? He's asked for 10, but, you know, I think I'm going to go a little bit more. Well, that's part of my offerings. But those who search the Scripture looking only to do the absolute bare necessities and search for ways to lessen the requirements by excusing away some of the commandments because the temple is no longer standing or because they feel like some of these commandments have been done away with, will never truly understand what it means to love Yehovah with their heart, soul, and strength. All their heart, soul, and strength. And one thing that we'll learn is we shouldn't rob Yehovah. Because what it all boils down to is when we rob him, we're robbing ourselves. Okay? And with that, I'm going to say Shabbat Shalom and ask you what you saw in this week's Parsha that you would like.